switches on and off. So do a test there.
Testing. I'll do that.
Hey, we'll get underway. Welcome tonight. And before we introduce our speaker, I just have the usual few announcements, upcoming meetings. Next Friday, April 21st, a real dull one. Sorry, we got to do this every year by the bylaws. It's our annual meeting and election of officers and board members. But it's a chance for you to really say, give your ideas, whatnot. We'll all be here. We'll be voting next week, and that's our yearly meeting. And then April 28th, the following Friday, we have a Zoom presentation by Molly Isaacs. I've been on her website. It is amazing. She talks all about light, and all of her pictures really just go into, and she talks extensively about how to find just the right light and how light could change your pictures. So that should be an interesting Zoom presentation. We are getting in person Mike Moats. Mike Moats is going to be in town for a workshop, and he is going to come and talk with us. And his topic that night, since he does flower photography, is going to be, is your flower photography boring? Let me help, too. So Mike's going to be here in person that night. So that should be an exciting night. That's May 5th. And May 12th, we have another Zoom lecture, which is interesting. Daniel Sved is a wildlife photographer. And he's going to talk about not only just techniques and everything in wildlife photography, but the hazards of wildlife photography and what kind of problems he's gotten into and whatnot. I mean, I could only guess. I don't have any advance preview on that. But that should definitely be interesting, and that'll be a Zoom lecture on May 12th. Our next SIG meeting, special interest group, May 4th, travel photography, and Dave is going to be talking about all things travel. What kind of equipment, how to travel with it under all kinds of conditions. And then as usual, we'll break into our camera groups, camera-specific groups to go over camera-specific problems. Coming up, field trips. The field trip season is back in. This Sunday, I think, is Sandy Ridge out in Lorain County. April 30th, and there's more information on these on our website on the calendar page. We're going back to the B&O Roundhouse down at West 3rd. That is always, an interesting area to photograph. Back to the Wild, which is one of our most popular field trips, coming up May 21st. And then The Wilds, which is different, is down in Columbus, and that is the safari park run by the Columbus Zoo. Like I said, you get a chance to get eaten by the giraffe there as well. So it is a very popular field trip. We haven't done that in quite a few years, and that is on May 31st. Now, our new website is just about up and running. We have an active field trip gallery. Right now, I'm putting them on our current website. Our new website will be much better, too. So from any of these field trips, if you have pictures, just email them to info@clevelandphoto.org and title your image with just your name and a number, like Richard Ader 1, Richard Ader 2. Because when we put them up, that's what will show up under the picture. We know where it is as well. So feel free, after any of these field trips, send 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 pictures in, and we will put them up on the website. The darkroom door is here, currently available on our website homepage. I have a link there to it. Excellent articles as well, a lot of good pictures. And as usual, all of our public meetings are on our YouTube channel. You could watch either live or anytime in the future. Just go to our homepage and click on the YouTube icon. And then when you're on YouTube, just go to the live section, and that'll have all of our websites. So at this point then, I'm going to give you a little, from the little bit I know about Alex. Alex Eisengart is going to talk to us tonight on bird photography. Alex started in 2019, I understand, according to your bio online there, and started with his father. And from what I read in one of the things too, apparently you used to go out, keep your father company, but not really do much of anything, and got a camera just to kind of keep yourself occupied, and really got taken by it. He was contacted by Hunt Photo Video, a shop in Boston, which connected him with several paid workshop opportunities around the country. Some of the workshop earnings have been funneled back into his hobby and paid for more equipment. And Alex's photos have landed on the Audubon Society's top 100 photography competitions youth category 3 times, and in 2021 he was listed as a 5th place for one of his photos of an American woodcock. Extremely impressive at age 15. So I am very, very happy to introduce Alex to you. So Alex, clicker's yours, and I'll get your slides up.
Yep. Thank you so much, Richard. So before I start, just from the little thing you gave, I actually know Mike Motes. He's a great guy. And then also Sandy Ridge Reservation. I absolutely love it. And you guys can use a lot of these tips when you guys actually go there this Sunday. So yeah, the way I got into photography is my dad, who's in the back of the audience if you want to wave. He was going and just taking pictures of wildlife kind of at parks close to him. And then I was sitting there like standing with him, watching him take the photos. So he actually offered to buy me a camera, and I declined. I was like, this is going to be a waste of money. What's the point? And then finally I'm like, well, I might as well try it. So I got the Sony a6400, and it's just ever since I've just loved it. So a little introduction to what we're talking about today. We'll be talking about bird photography and everything you can do during your time in the field to improve your bird images. So we'll start off with kind of how to find the birds, and then what time of day to go out, and then lighting and camera settings, and it'll all tie in together. So when thinking about going out and birding in the field, you have to realize that editing cannot fix every image that you take, and therefore you have to do things while you're out there to kind of maximize the images that you're going to be taking. And before you can even have an opportunity to maximize your images, you have to first start off by finding the birds. So for example, this Lapland longspur right here was in the middle of a road in Geauga County, kind of this farmer that lets people come onto his field and bird. And I'm going to show you guys actually how I was able to find that, because you can't just drive and randomly come across this. So I started by planning out my shot, because a great shot always begins with planning. So first you have to plan your outing so you actually know where to go before you can even consider this second step, which is actually taking your shot. And this was taken at the same farmer's field as well. So you have to first start by knowing where the birds are, because that is the most important step. So you want to do this by using eBird. Now, eBird is just a large database of bird sightings. And I know a lot of photographers don't actually use eBird, but it's been increasing in popularity, and it's gotten actually very big here in the US. So most of the birding hotspots around here have gotten birds added to the database. So you're able to search this database of bird sightings or add to it on your own, and if you're a hardcore birder, it'll keep track of your life list, your year list, and everything in between. So when actually searching eBird, there's a few different ways to do it. First of all, they have an app. You can just go onto the App Store and download it. It's very self-explanatory. But when doing it on a web browser, you want to type eBird and then the name of a bird. So that's how you start by searching for birds individually. So let's say you wanted to find the Lapland longspur. You just go into your Google search browser, type in eBird Lapland longspur, and it'll come up. It's always the first link. You just click it, and it gives you this big, long bio of the birds. And then you just scroll down and click Large Map, and scroll in a little bit, and it'll show you this kind of messy looking thing. From here, you'll notice that there's flames. This right here is a flame, and that just means the bird was seen at a birding hotspot. If your flame or if your little point is red, it means it was seen within 30 days. And if it's blue, it means it was seen greater than 30 days ago. So here I was looking for a Dunlin last year in April, and I would notice all of these little red flames, and I would say, okay, I should consider going to one of these. So you can click on it, and it'll show you a list of all the different dates that someone saw it. You can then click on that date and figure out exactly where that location is. So for me, I'd probably consider going to Pickerel Creek right here and look for the Dunlin. And also, I'd just like to mention, if you guys have any questions, you can just raise your hand, and I'm happy to answer. So when searching for specific locations, like here I was looking at Beaver Marsh, which is pretty close to here, all you have to do is the exact same thing, type eBird and the name of the location you're looking for, click the first link, and it gives you a big page that looks like this. So here you can look at all the photos that people submitted onto eBird. So these are not my photos, it's just photos that random people submitted onto eBird. It shows you the date that people saw them, and then a list of the birds that were seen. And you can just scroll through this, you can click on these dates, and it just gives you a big long list of birds. So here what happens if you click on one of the actual dates, it gives you the eBird checklist that the person themselves saw. So this is my checklist at the Lorraine Impoundment Lakeside Landing, which is a little just area of mud basically right along the lake where they took dredged river and put it onto the shore. And there's tons of birds here, especially shorebirds when they're migrating. And this is just starting off the list of everything I saw. So someone could see this and be like, oh, I actually really wanted to see a short-billed dawwitcher, head out there and find that bird. Another great way to find birds is Instagram. Social media is really useful. Just try following local birders or birding hashtags, and it'll start to pop up on your For You page or your Explore page, and all of these different birds pop up. So here, for example, a lot of people geotag it. So here's an old post of mine. And this is a photo I took at the Nature Center at Shaker Lakes, and you could see, oh, I actually want to see a downy woodpecker. Click on that, and now you know where to go. Also, Facebook birding groups are really good. People just put on their bird sightings and share all these crazy locations. The only thing to be careful about when you're doing this is try not to go to, like if you think a bird might be under distress from lots of people visiting it, try to give it some space. And because some birds kind of blow up on Instagram, like there's a snowy owl in California, and you want to make sure it's not feeling stressed from all the photographers. Also, people are a great resource. A lot of friends will share their best birding hotspots. Just go out in the field. In my entire career of birding, I've only met 2 rude birders, and I've met hundreds and hundreds of birders. And yeah, sometimes they just don't want to talk, but most of the time they're super excited to share what they've seen at the location you're at or what they've seen before. It's great. And also, birds are all around you guys. I was driving here, going over the bridge on, I think, 271, and I just saw a peregrine falcon fly over just on my drive here. So they're all around you. You just have to keep your eye out for them. Also, like backyard feeders are great. I had like an eastern towhee at my feeder today and a purple finch, which are some great migrants going through right now because we are kind of ramping up into peak migration. And also, when you actually get out to the field, so you figured out where to go from eBird, you want to know the bird's behaviors. Because when doing this, lots of birds have different behaviors. So you'll have red-eyed vireos that are hanging out in the canopy, and horned larks here that like open fields and actually manure spreads in the winter. So if you go to field guides like the Sibley Birding Guide or Audubon.org or the Audubon app, you can just read up on all these birds. These resources are Audubon is completely free, and then the Sibley I think is like $12 on Amazon. And it has all this great information on the birds. It has their range maps, their flight calls, and just anything you'd really need to know about them in order to find them when you're in the field. Also, a lot of people actually overlook parks in the middle of cities. So near us, that would be like Wendy Park, or actually Cleveland Public Square, like the little planters they have, get lots of birds in migration. And park birds are great because they're really accustomed to people and they're super easy to photograph. So ducks that if you go to Sandy Ridge are often like far out in the back will just be right up to you. This was like right in the middle of Washington, D.C., like right next to the Washington Monument, and they get really close to you. And it's really just exaggerated with ducks because often they're very skittish where they can be hunted. Here's another example of this as well. I don't know if you guys have heard of Headland Dune State Nature Preserve. It's like 50 minutes from us. And when I was there, I actually only saw 2 shorebirds on that beach. So I was there like 7 a.m. on, I think it was actually May 6th of 2021. I'm not 100% sure. And I only saw two, but I was able to get all these amazing photos with this great light because the birds here were a little bit more accustomed to people and they let you get a lot closer to them. And also, the terrain here was very easy to go on. It was just beach. So I could walk up to the birds and not have to worry about here at Metzger Marsh, where there was all this mud. And at Metzger Marsh, this is the image I was able to get, which just isn't as good. There's not as many people that go here. It's pretty much in the middle of nowhere. And even though I saw like 50 or 60 shorebirds along with this guy, I got really no good photos there. When at Headland Dunes, I was able to get all of these photos just because it's a smaller and easier to kind of move around park. So also you have to figure out when birds are here. You wouldn't want to be looking for a chestnut-sided warbler in the middle of December. This is an American woodcock, and this one got an Audubon Top 100 in 2021. And there's actually a lot of planning that went into this shot. So I'll get into that a little bit, but what I did is I figured out when the woodcocks were coming. I actually took this one at Erie Street Cemetery in the middle of Cleveland and just went in, drove in, searched around for the woodcocks. I figured out that they like to hide among these little leaves here and along the wall. And I figured out using the Audubon app that they're very secretive. And by doing so, I really scanned for one, found one, and then got this photo. So in doing so, I learned when the bird was migrating, and I also knew where it liked to rest on its route. I knew it liked Erie Street Cemetery. It wasn't just an accident that I showed up there. And there's a few ways I did that. So first of all, I used this amazing resource. We're really lucky. We have the Black Swamp Bird Observatory very close to our west, and it's actually the biggest birding festival in the entire United States. It's the biggest week in American birding, if not the world, actually. And they have this great resource online because they're such a migration-based birding festival, and you can look at the timing of spring migration, the timing of fall migration, or the timing of fall shorebird migration. So you just type in timing of spring migration, BSBO, click on the first link, and here it is. So let's see where we are right now. We're April 1 to 15, and it looks like waterfowl migration is heavy right now. Some raptors are passing through, like red-shouldered hawks and rough-legged hawks. We've got some early shorebirds, like yellowlegs and golden plovers. We've got flickers, hermit thrushes, winter wrens, yellow-rumped warblers, and some fox sparrows and some other warbler species they said sprinkling in the middle of the month. And that's totally true right now. So it's an amazing resource. We're really lucky to have this because a lot of times I'll be like, oh, what bird are migrating right now? Like what habitats do I have to go to? Just type this in and it reminds me. Another amazing resource is birdcast.info. So birdcast.info, if you guys are going to write anything down, write this down. It uses weather radar to track migrating birds in flight. So what it was actually designed for is to pick up water droplets in the atmosphere, obviously in the form of clouds. But it's also really good for picking up hummingbirds or warblers. So when they're on the weather radar, they just see big clumps of often actually oddly circular masses moving across the Gulf or just up the country. And they realize that that's birds. So some scientists at eBird in the Cornell Lab of Ornithology realized they could do this to track these moving birds in flight. And by doing so, they can figure out when they have to turn off the lights in the cities so they have reduced bird collisions, but also it's a great resource for birders. So right now, I've been tracking it lately. This one is for 2021, but right now, you'd see Ohio is all lit up. So, yeah.
I actually wanted to just comment on, I just happened to be on there last night looking at the map, and I noticed that it shows you there's a red line that goes across from sun, so it's actually
Yeah.
an interactive map in real time.
Yeah, it's very cool to see, and that's like the sunrise and sunset moving across the country. So yeah, because the birds, they know, so what they'll do is at night, so they spend all day getting food and feeding, and at night they'll kind of go up to a high perch. So if it's in the grasslands, that would just be a little tree sticking up, but in the forest, they go up to the top of the canopy, wait till it gets to be as dark as possible, then they go up to about 3,000 to 5,000 feet in the air, and then once it starts to get light again, they literally just drop down, just straight down, like that. So they're actually pretty easy to track because of that. It's not irregular or anything. And guys, this whole thing really does work. Using eBird and other resources, I was able to accumulate 165 lifers in Costa Rica, and a lifer is just a bird I've never seen before. So I saw 186 species in total, and what we did is we drove from the middle of the country to kind of the outskirts, and I used eBird to figure out where to stop along the way, and I was able to do this even with being sick too. So eBird was a really great source. And then just because just lifers from a show of hands, anyone here hardcore birder or just birder as well? All right, that's good. There's some hands. So yeah, I was very excited about this. And then also the violet saberwing. So now you found the park and you know what birds you're looking for. Now we need to think about lighting and timing of our images. Because I'm trying to find the right words for this. Oh, sorry. The thing that I see that I wouldn't say ruin, but kind of offsets the most images is this intense unidirectional lighting, which is just called harsh lighting. It's when you get these really overexposed highlights and dark shadows. So you can see here in the bird, on the back of the rump, it's almost completely black. The eye is completely black. The bill is completely black. Yet I actually properly exposed for the stomach. So when you have that just completely wrong exposures, it can mess up an image. The only good thing about it is it can be good for showing shape and texture, so you can really tell how round this American golden plover is. Here's some times where I've tried to work around it. So this is a wood stork I took a photo of, and I tried to recover it in post by bringing up my shadows all the way and bringing down my highlights. And it is a usable image, it just looks slightly off. So the best way to really go around it and try to get the most out of your images with harsh lighting is to try to get as little shadow as possible. So here I was shooting this ruddy duck, and I made sure to position myself not to the edge of the lake, but get right in front of the duck. So I was able to make sure nearly the entire body was without shadow. Now helping me a little bit here was actually the water. It is reflecting a little bit of light back up into these shadows, which is what makes this image usable. But it still is a little bit bright, and you can tell it's harsh lighting. Yeah.
I noticed a lot of your photos are at their level. How do you do that?
Yeah.
Do you get down in the water yourself?
So I will be getting to that later in the talk, but I'll be pushing this a lot during the talk. I absolutely love eye level. In doing so, I just often crouch down with my camera, and then it has a little foot, so I hold it like this. And I just kind of crouch down like that, kind of squatting down for you that are going on Zoom. But here I was just on the shore, and whenever I see a lake and I'm doing bird photography, I always realize, can I get eye level with that lake? Is it too steep of a slope? And I'm going to go back a few slides. So for this image right here, when I was in DC, the way the lake was put is they had the stones going all the way around the lake that were just the barrier of the lake. So it wasn't like a stone that goes down to water level, it was man-made, and then the water about 2 or 3 inches below. So for this one, in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have done it, but I was hovering my camera about a few inches above the water to get that bouquet in the foreground. And be careful, I've gotten better since then. I have lost one camera to this, so it's not worth it. I had some problems with ice, and you definitely want to avoid that. That was a learning experience, so. Okay, here's another example of harsh lighting. This is actually taken at Sandy Ridge. I absolutely love the resident sandhill cranes there. And I use the harsh light to my advantage because you can really see all the textures here, like the lines and the feathers, which if I had like golden hour lighting that's a lot less intense, it would not have given me all the shape and texture, which is really nice in this image because there's no face or anything. Also, here's another image where I was able to kind of use harsh lighting to my advantage. I actually liked the fact that we have a little bit of kind of blown out areas here, and this is actually a coot. You can follow it down. This is the coot's like top of the head. Here's the bill, and then down here is like water droplets reflecting off the coot. And if this wasn't harsh lighting, I wouldn't have gotten those cool bouquet balls. So rules are made to be broken. You can always use harsh lighting in your image, just most of the time it's going to make it look a little bit worse, like right here. Harsh lighting disrupts your sharpness and focusing because you get heat waves or just light reflecting off all these surfaces. So especially in water, grasses, pavement, and sand, you get these really wonky effects. And you also can get these same effects if you're shooting out of your car window in winter. So if your car is like 60 degrees, but outside it's 20, you get this same really wonky effect. You can see it in the background there in that bouquet, and also how these buffle heads just aren't sharp. And that's just because of your heat waves, and the only way to avoid this is just actually not shooting eye level or not having harsh lighting. So harsh lighting, again, is caused by the sun being high in the sky without anything blocking it. So there's two ways to avoid harsh lighting. You can go out when it's low in the sky, like sunrise and sunset. We know that as golden hour. Or you can go out when the sun is diffused, like cloudy days. So here, there's a light layer of clouds around the sun at Headland Dunes, and it gives you that really nice, almost actually golden hour look, which I'll get into in a little bit. So note that harsh lighting can be avoided when shooting in forests, because not only can the clouds diffuse the sun, leaves can as well. So I was actually shooting the summer tanager in the shade of some trees. You can see some light is getting through on the tanager, but we can work with that. And remember that when you're shooting in a forest, not all parts of the forest are in shade. So my background here did get blown out. Now I know this is not an editing talk, but in here I did reduce the highlights to try to mitigate that a little bit. And then early and late day lighting are just amazing. I absolutely love it. This was also taken at Sandy Ridge, by the way. So you get that really nice soft lighting, less bright highlights and less dark shadows. You can see even though the background isn't a shadow here, which is why it's black, you can see on the entire length of the cedar waxwing, nothing is exposed incorrectly. The black face mask is dark, but it should be. Also, it gives you really nice warmer light, which, I mean, you can see here on the cedar waxwing, which makes it glow. This is the most ideal, perfect lighting you can work with. So sometimes at sunrise, you'll actually get out early enough. Like here, this was taken like 6:20 a.m. This was February, so it's actually still, the sun didn't quite come up above the horizon yet, but it was able to reflect here in the water, which can give you some nice different colors in your water, which is always nice to have. Here's one I've taken at sunset. Again, actually the sun here do we have a question? Oh, sorry.
Are we to assume that at no point you use artificial lighting or fill lighting or one of those giant circus tents, lightener arrays to compensate all you've committed to natural light?
Yeah, so I don't use filler light. I have seen people do it, especially like in the rainforests, actually, because there's just not that much light in there. Personally, I think it looks a little bit off. I think it can be done correctly, but sometimes when people get right up with artificial lighting, it just looks a little bit wonky. But if they're a little bit farther away and it's filling in, it can actually look very nice, and that can really help mitigate harsh lighting. I have used it on pet photography, like reflectors and macro. I definitely use it on, but not as much for birds. There's just so much going on when shooting birds. It's hard for me to also handle artificial lighting. Yeah. So here, this one was taken at sunset, and I actually waited till the sun got below the horizon, so the sun was behind these godwits, and now it's below, and that's how you get that really cool color, like these pink hues in your background. Although when doing this, you can get high ISOs, which I'll talk about later. Here's another one taken at sunset. This one was front lit, and this was a piping plover in New Jersey. And it's just, again, that golden hour lighting, you just can't go wrong with it. Front lit, back lit, it all works. Also, cloudy day photography is very underrated. I was scrolling through my Instagram, which is Kid with a Sony, by the way, and at the end of the slideshow, and I realized that the majority of my photos were taken on cloudy days. And that's not an accident. It allows you to go out at any time of day, so I don't have to worry about getting myself up super early, which can be really hard. Also, there's always soft lighting, so I don't have to worry about it. Is the sun going to come out and that's going to ruin all my photos? Do I have to get my photos now or in 50 minutes? Like, I don't have to worry about any of that. Also, it's very diffused, so I can just shoot from any direction. It also can give me some kind of cool kind of images, like high key images. And a high key image is when your background is completely white, and clouds can provide this white. It's also really cool to experiment, trying to get a white background with a white bird. And you can't do that really on a sunny day, as then you'll get blue in your background. Also, cloudy days make it easier to get high-key images in the snow and make them look like they're kind of walking on clouds because there's no reflections coming off the snow. So often, if you're really trying to get high-key with snow and sun, you'll have some areas of the snow that are way brighter than others, and then actually shadows in snow, which can look a little bit weird when you try to push the exposure to this extreme. Now, the only downside to cloudy photography is that it can reflect off the water and make it really hard to shoot. So it almost artificially creates harsh lighting. You can see this guy's not really happy about it. You can see like here in the water it's really dark, but it's also very light because it's reflecting off the clouds. And this duck here, especially with it being a black hooded merganser, this is completely black here. So it was really hard to push my exposure because my ISO was also very high. However, this was taken on the same day, and sometimes the stars align. Sometimes if the water is a little bit less choppy, then you can get these, or actually sometimes if it's choppy enough, then the reflections do not reflect the cloudy sky, or if it's still enough, you can get less reflections in the water that make it a very usable and actually even nice image. Also going back to finding birds, this right here was taken at the pond across from my house, and that's why the water's kind of green. They were like dyeing it or something. So yeah, this was like a 30-second walk. And again, sometimes the ripples in the water can make a big difference. Here we had a little bit of light coming behind the coming through the clouds on these brant, and you can see how big of a difference it made because these are black, but just having that tiny bit of light made this image like more than usable. And also the lack of ripples in the water makes it so you don't have any extremes within the water of dark and light. Now, really, besides sunrise and sunset, your ideal is going to be thin layers of clouds. So this gives you both soft and directional light, so you can get that little glint in the eye, which we'll be talking about in a little bit as well. And it's just ideal for photography in pretty much all respects, I've realized, especially with birds. And also allows you to shoot any time of day, so you don't have to worry about it being harsh lighting. So if you go on vacation and this is your light, no, you lucked out. Also a little added bonus, this was taken at the same farm field that I took those long spurs I showed you earlier and redpoll. So here's a little comparative lighting. This is Kevin from Sandy Ridge Reservation. I just passed someone on the trail, they told me they named it Kevin, so now I call him Kevin the Sandhill Crane. And these images really kind of speak for themselves. But here you can see his wing is completely overblown, almost blending in with the background. And then you have even slightly underexposed shadows. Also realize the color difference in the shadows and the highlights. Here it's much warmer, and here it's blue, and that does mess up your image as well when you're trying to correct your color balance. Now here, this is completely cloudy. This is a completely cloudy day in October, and it really makes these colors pop. Colors are a lot more saturated after rain or just on cloudy days, and also we have no problems with exposing Kevin here. Here's another one. These were taken on the same day, and these are in Central Park in New York City. I was touring a school for my sister, and while she was touring the school, I got to do duck photography, so that was really nice. And here, just a little bit of light, sun is kind of popping out through the clouds, and the exposure on here is correct over all parts of the image. Well, here, this was really tough because this is a male ruddy duck, and I was trying to expose for this white cheek, but he has black on his crest and his eye, and there's also shadows going along here, and you can see how it just kind of messes up your image. Like, you can tell something is just slightly off, and that's from the lighting. And here, unlike the other ruddy duck image where the water kind of came to our advantage, it just did not hit the duck correctly, so you can get the full effect of the harsh lighting. And there's kind of the cutoff line right behind his bill and down the breast. Here's another one. This is at Veterans Park in Mentor. And these are two yellow-bellied sapsuckers. Here we have the harsh lighting one on the left. And you can see the bark of the tree is completely overexposed, and you can't really tell where the eye is because you have that black stripe going by, and then it's just severely underexposed. And the exposure in this image is just all over the place. On this one here, I was able to get it on a nice cloudy day, and the exposure over the entire image is correct. This was taken about a year ago today, so we've got some stuff kind of blooming over here in the background, and it's nice and saturated. And you can, if you get close enough, because it's small in frame, you can see where the eye is relative to everything else. Okay, so now you know when you're going out, you know what birds you're looking for, you know where to go to. What do you have to do now? Well, you got to pick up your camera to get your settings, of course, and you've got to position yourself correctly with the subject. So let's just start by talking about exposure. I know you guys are a photographic society, so you've probably heard this a lot, but I'm just going to go over it once again. We have the triangle of exposure. These are the three main things that affect your exposure. It's your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter speed. So your shutter speed is just how long the sensor is exposed to light. So obviously, the longer your shutter speed is, the more light's going to be collected into your lens. Your aperture is the narrowest opening in the lens, so the wider your aperture is, the more light's collected. And the smaller your aperture is, there's a deeper depth of field, so more of your image is going to be in focus. And then your ISO is your sensor sensitivity to light. Your higher your ISO is, that means your image is in darker settings, and that's going to cause you to have more grain and more incorrect colors. So let's see which of these settings we want for every scenario. So when shooting birds, I have not found a single scenario yet where I'm not shooting shutter priority mode. So shutter priority mode is great because you get to choose your shutter speed and your camera chooses your aperture and your ISO. So basically, when shooting a bird, there's just so much going on besides camera settings, with the bird moving around, hopping from branch to branch, and you're trying to catch focus on it and get your light correct. You only want to have to change your shutter speed to make sure it's sharp. Your camera often does pretty good when setting your exposure right, so nothing is overblown, which I'll talk about how to make sure it does that in a second. And your aperture, except for one scenario, which we'll talk about, is almost always open because your ISOs are going to be super high. Also, you want to shoot metering mode spot. That's how you get your camera to get your exposure correct and make sure that ISO is nice and good. This is when it sets the exposure for one spot on an image, so it's going to want to be your focusing point or the eye of the bird. Because if the eye of the bird is metered correctly and the surrounding plumage, then the rest of your image will pretty much be good. Unless you have super blown out highlights and dark shadows, then if that's the case, you want to expose for your highlights and leave your shadows under, because you can always recover some amount of shadows in post. However, your highlights, once they're blown out, they're gone, and you cannot recover that. So when shooting birds, there's two different types of focus modes. And this is also Kevin, again, at Sandy Ridge. There's spot focus, and this is when there's just a little image on your camera, on the sensor, that it chooses to focus on, and you can like move it around wherever you want to focus. Often it's the center of the image. In the pros, it's really good for focusing on a bird in a busy environment, and it's good for ensuring focus on the eye. Like right here, I was using spot autofocus, and the eye is completely sharp. The cons, it's really hard to focus on a fast-moving subject. So if a bird is flying across your frame, you're going to want to use wide area autofocus for Sony and Nikon, and zone autofocus for Canon. That's just the names. And this is just your camera chooses a large area, and you can move it around, but it's again often in the center of your frame, and it chooses what to focus on. So it's kind of a luck of a draw if it's going to focus on the right thing. And by doing so, it's good for a moving target because it's more likely to hit it than you are. You know, a small little point focus on a bird that's just zipping past you, they can move like 30, 50 miles per hour. This has a better shot of hitting it than you do. And it's also good with a bird with a really separated background, or like a bird that's just sitting on one really open branch. So if you're shooting in your yard and you put up a stick next to your feeder, or if you're just shooting a bird on your feeder, then this would work. But the con is it doesn't always pick up the eye. So sometimes I have a sandpiper that's moving really fast through the frame, and I have to use wide area autofocus because I just cannot move my point around as fast as it's going back and forth and moving like up and down. So I do go to wide area, and the hit rate is not as good as if I was able to just use spot focus. It'll pick up focus on the wings, on the butt, on the neck. Sometimes if it's looking at you with its beak, it'll pick up the beak, and it can get frustrating at times. But when it does hit it, it's good, and it makes the image even more like exciting to get. And another con is it just doesn't always grab focus on the right object. Yeah. So I have a little bit. My dad's camera actually has it, and then I shot for like 10 minutes with an A1 one time. And yeah, it's very impressive. And for that, you can, I actually don't know what the exact focusing mode on it is called, but as long as it picks up the eye reliably enough, then you don't really have to worry about any of this. However, what I've realized is in practice, it picks it up fairly well, but not every time. And especially if you're like too focused like on the background, then it wouldn't be able to pick it up. But I don't know if you've had any experiences with just picking up every single time.
Nothing works perfectly.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for the small birds and the branches.
But
Yeah.
it's remarkably good.
Yeah, well,
I've been very happy.
oh, good, yeah. Well, I mean, I think for this scenario, we could definitely pick it up, but I'm not sure for a warbler like this hopping in the branch. And although technology never ceases to amaze you, so.
I think it would do just fine. I've had to pick out the eye of a dark bird in a very branchy tree.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Oh, wow. Well, I guess if your guys' camera can do that, then this is if it kind of just fails on you then. So,
I still go back to that. I mean, it depends on the conditions.
yeah. Especially if like a bird, sometimes, I mean, I don't know, the A1's gotten really good. I've seen like videos of it, especially with like sport events as they're like hopping up and down and turning around and it keeps focus. So yeah, it can get pretty good. So when shooting birds that are fluttering, so think your warblers, your songbirds, your passerine, you're going to want to use a shutter speed that's somewhere in the middle. So a lot of people that are shooting landscapes or people or even like sports don't realize just how high of shutter speeds you need to use. I mean, these birds move fast. So middle shutter speed is 1/800th. Sometimes for passerine I can go down to 1/640th, but this is kind of the sweet spot because it's slow enough that you can get a little bit of light into your camera, but also quick enough that you hit your hit rate's pretty high and you get a lot of sharp images. Also, you want to have your aperture all the way open, get as much light in as possible, and as much blur in as you can. And also use spot focus, and these are just the ideal passerine settings. These are my settings 75% of the time I'm shooting, because I do a lot of passerine. For birds in flight, or birds that are moving really fast, so we have two very hungry blue jays here that were fighting over these peanuts, you have to use a lot higher of shutter speeds. So here I used 1/2500th, and luckily there was enough light for me to do this. You can see right there, a lot of light here. And sometimes I close down my aperture a little bit. So you are shooting at least 1/2000th. So you don't want to close down too much, because otherwise you have no light in. But if you're shooting f6.3, I could see the case to be made to be shooting f7.1. But again, you don't want to close it down too much, and sometimes I just don't close it down at all depending on my lighting conditions. And for this, you want to use the wide area or the zone autofocus, because for here, I mean, with spot, I could have gotten unlucky, had it in the middle of my frame, and focused on that background. So I got this was a very good use of wide area autofocus. And that's also Firestone Metro Park. The birds will eat out of your hand here, and in the winter, they often do need a little bit of the feeding, so it's good for photography. And lots of warblers there in spring as well. Like a lot of the warblers I showed you guys were taken here. So using a low shutter speed, and I'm talking for birds in flight below 1/1000th, actually can work. And there's really two scenarios this will work in. One is hummingbirds, and this will give you that effect of that sharp body and those blurred wings. And the other effect is panning. The other mode is panning, which will also give you the same effect. Shooting hummingbirds with like 1/800th or even below, I've gone down to like 1/500th one time when I had almost no light. It does work. It's a lot easier because they hold really still with their head, but it's a lot harder when you're panning. And I've only been able to do it really with gulls because they fly kind of slow. Sometimes you can use a slower shutter speed. This was a mourning dove, like that kind of lifted up the feeder and was hovering for a few seconds during a snowstorm, and I shot at 1/80th, which is like super slow for birds. And then also, I know again this is not a post talking about what to do in post, but I did remove the bird feeder under here, being completely honest about that, so that's how I was able to get that. And sometimes 1/2000th is not enough for tack sharp pixels. These are a little blurred here because from motion blur, because this tree swallow was not happy about this killdeer, and I actually should have used a higher shutter speed than this. And I know some people who go up to very high shutter speeds. I would say cap it at 1/4000th. I mean, even that seems pretty fast to me. I've never gone to 1/4000th, but I heard someone recently photographing actually tree swallows that went to 1/8000th. Now, the only problem with this is your higher shutter speeds you use, the less light gets in your camera, and the higher your ISO is. So it can work, but you will be dealing with those higher ISOs. So for perched birds, and I'm talking like owls or maybe a falcon that's just sitting there, or a hawk, just birds that are not moving at all, you can lower down your shutter speed to below 1/640th. And there's no real bottom cap to this. It's more how good your tripod is, because this is the best use of a tripod. Because otherwise, like when a bird is flitting around, it's really hard to move around with a tripod. Now, I do know a lot of people who do it, and they really like it. It's not for me, but there's also if that's what you like, you can do that as well. So for this one, you want to have a large aperture, because there's no reason for you to close it down. You're going to hit focus. And if you want, you can even use manual focus for this, but I still like single point autofocus the most. And this right here was taken with a tripod at 1/200th of a second. I could have gone lower, but I guess I just didn't. This was taken on a tripod at 1/13th of a second. So owls hold really still, so you can do this. But if you try to go down to this low of a shutter speed, it just won't work with high wind. This was taken after sunset. That's how I was able to do that. And get his eyes open and everything. But it just, sometimes like the wind will blow and it won't work. And if you've ever tried to take a picture of a person at 1/13th of a second, they cannot hold that still. It's really only with owls. Again, so the lower your light is, the higher your ISO is. It's very important to bird photography because you're working with high ISOs. It is definitely not uncommon for me to get ISOs as high as 6,400. I mean, I can go much higher than that. But in doing so, when you're working with an ISO this high, you want to slow your shutter speeds down a little bit. So if you were shooting 1/800th for a passerine before, maybe slow it down to 1/640th. And also make sure your aperture is all the way open for this, just to lower your ISO. And use software that reduces noise if necessary. Again, this is more of a post thing, but when you're out in the field, you can keep in mind that Topaz Labs Denoise AI is always an option. I love it, and I use it on most of my images, but again, it's more of a editing thing, so I'm not going to go into detail. So when shooting with the opposite of dim light, when you're shooting with harsh light, which we have here for this lesson's mot, you can see the background's a little bit over. You're going to want to use slightly higher shutter speeds, and that's just because you can. When you up your shutter speed, you have a higher hit rate in images. So if there's harsh lighting, take advantage, up your shutter speed. Why not? So now you found the bird, you know when to go out, you have your camera settings. What's next? Well, like mentioned earlier, you have to get eye level. Eye level does not always mean getting eye level with a bird that's already on the ground. It can be a bird in flight like this for this forester's tern. I was shooting piping plovers and this dude flew over and I went from my crouched position. I stood up and was like that. Sometimes if a bird is perched high above my head, I'll actually hold my camera above my head. And that's just because it creates a sense of connection with your subject. If you're on the same level of them, you're kind of within their world. And often, especially if the bird is on the ground, you can get a pleasing foreground. And even if the bird's not on the ground and you're just not shooting with an angle, it can get a pleasing background. For example, if a bird, is in front of you and you're looking down on it, now the distance between the background of the bird and you is the hypotenuse from the bird's head to the ground, whatever your angle is. However, if you're shooting crouched down on the ground with your camera on the ground, now you've moved your background probably like 10 or 15 feet behind the subject, when before it was maybe a foot or 6 inches even. So if a bird, so this is my rule of thumb. I love this. I preach this everywhere. If a bird is on the ground, so is your camera. And this applies to water. And so if a bird is like in the water, your camera's on the ground. And it just gives you that really nice foreground. You can see like here with the rocks with this black turnstone. And then now we have the beach, or sorry, the ocean in the background and those crashing waves, when before it would have just been more rock in the background. So here's an example right here. We have a domestic duck that hangs out in the pond across from my house. And you can see the hypotenuse of that triangle is not very big. I was shooting down on this duck, and the background is maybe 7 inches from the top of that bird's head. And then there's no foreground here. Everything in this frame is focused. However, I took a photo of I think it's its sister. We kind of keep track of the birds, of these ducks' names and everything. But when in doing so, I got eye level, and you can see the cloudy day gave me this kind of overexposed area that I was talking about earlier. But by doing so, I got this really nice blurred background, and I got rid of this kind of rock in the foreground as well. Here's another example of this. This was a Harris's sparrow at Cleveland Lakefront State Nature Preserve. In the beginning, we have these little cherries on the ground. Actually, I think they're crab apples, actually. And at first, this was actually distraction and not something good for the image. Also, the bird's not looking at me, because if I'm doing my photography right, the bird wouldn't even notice that I'm there. However, when you get eye level, now you're almost on its level. You can tell there's a little mushroom here. It almost looks more like a macro shot, like you're more within its world. These crab apples that were once a distraction are now really good foreground, and that grass you could barely see in the top of the frame. That's a nice bokeh in the background. And also, now the bird's actually looking at me, because here it's not going to tilt its head up. So in order to get it to look at me, I had to go down to its level and hope it kind of gazes off into the distance and faces towards me. Now here's some examples. It's an example for and against eye level. So the only time I would ever say not to get eye level, besides just trying to be creative, because that's always an option, is when you can get a reflection here in the background. With that being said, I really like how this image turned out with that foreground and the background of the salt marsh in the background. So this is really up to you. Plus, it's fun to get eye level. This is me when I was 12, getting eye level in a marsh. This is good ice, because this right here had mud under it. I knew that from years before, so I was fine there. And here's another example. Again, I just absolutely love eye level. These are some geese that I saw in San Diego, and before you would have just had the entire frame be with grass. By getting eye level and actually getting them on top of a hill too, I was able to get the city in the background and get layers. We have the grass as your foreground, the goose itself, the city in the background, and then the sky. And none of these layers would have been here if I hadn't gotten eye level. And sometimes the bird's not on the ground, so you have to wait for it to come down to eye level for you. And for this, patience is the key. I have almost no patience except for when it comes to birds, and I could just watch them for days. So just try to take in nature and wait for the bird to kind of work with you. Here's another example. This image is harsh lighting and not eye level, and because it's not eye level, the harsh lighting is really exaggerated, because now this entire branch is in shadow. Under the wings, it's in shadow. However, when it gets eye level, now nothing is in shadow, so harsh lighting doesn't actually matter as much. Now we have better background here. It's not just sky, and again, there's no branch you can see that could be in shadow. Even if I had cropped for this to have it so what it was sitting on, which was actually a fence, it would not have been in shadow because it was eye level, and I was able to avoid that. Also, any questions so far? Okay, I'm gonna get a sip of water. So, sorry. So again, rules are made to be broken, and sometimes try not to get eye level and see what image you can get. So this was a picture of a little blue heron that I was photographing in South Carolina, and there's a little bridge that went over, and I was able to shoot directly down on the heron, which I think gave a pretty cool effect. And again, here's some more counterexamples for eye level, because as much as I like to teach eye level, I think it's good to always keep an open mind. Here's a song sparrow. I went below eye level in order to get that rainbow in the background. And here's a great blue heron where I went above eye level in order to get that reflection. Now, when approaching your bird, because you also don't want to scare it, don't make eye contact. Move slowly and keep your silhouette small. So nothing that this white-breasted nuthatch is doing. It's making direct eye contact with you. That's a no-no. And just move slowly. So you want to move slowly like a cat, but unlike a cat, you don't want to keep yourself hidden. Now, unless you can keep yourself hidden the entire time, the best way to scare a bird is to stand behind a tree and then stick your camera out to try to get an image. The bird has no, it's just not expecting you to be there. It doesn't know you're going to be there, and it'll just fly away because it had no idea you're getting that close. So as long as you can watch the body language of the bird, if it's looking directly at you, you're probably close enough. Of course, if it takes a step or two away, then you're close enough. And just try to keep your silhouette small. So by doing this, don't put your arms out and your legs out. Try not to make loud noises, obviously. But if you're on the ground, actually army crawling to the bird can help. I try not to do that, though, because obviously you can get pretty dirty while doing that. Also, make sure your subject's looking at the camera, and ideally you'll have a highlight or a reflection in the eye. So here, the mallard is tilted slightly towards me. So if you're ever culling your images, just look for the one that's looking slightly more towards you. I mean, unless it's you're choosing between a side profile and just directly at you, obviously. And again, look for that highlight or reflection in the eye. It can make a really big difference. Now, there's two different types of highlights or reflections you can get. You can get a reflection kind of off the environment or from the actual sky, and both work. And the reason for this is because birds have very dark eyes most of the time. So your brain is looking for a pupil because you're used to that in people. And the highlight or that reflection kind of serves as the pupil. And here's a little comparison of kind of everything we've talked about. Here we've got, actually this was a harsh lighting day, but I was inside the forest, which mitigated my harsh lighting. We've got harsh lighting on this golden crown kinglet. It's not eye level, so you don't feel that connection. And there's no glint in the eye, so we don't have that other connection, and it doesn't really look like it's looking at you. This one, it looks like you're looking into its world. This one, it looks like you're looking at its world. Here's another example of that glint in the eye. This is the exact same image from Sandy Ridge, except I went in post and removed the eye glint. And again, you don't feel the same sense of connection with the subject. You'd be surprised how much of a difference a glint in the eye can make. Now also, when photographing your subject, make sure it's unobstructed, and I'll get into the differences of obstructed subjects and unobstructed subjects, because there is a little bit of gray area, actually. Here's an example of an obstruction. This is a Tennessee warbler, and there is a branch cutting right across it. This was taken at Shaker Lakes. This is an obstructed image. This right here is a yellow-rumped warbler taken at Firestone Metro Park, and there's no obstructions here. The bird is completely shown. Even though this little piece of the stick is going in front of the bird's tail, it's not enough to call this an obstructed image. Foreground objects or objects the bird is interacting with are good, because that can add depth to the image, and that's not an obstruction. So you can see all this foreground here, even if it was moved a little bit to the left, I wouldn't quite call it an obstruction, because it adds that kind of extra layer and depth to your subject. Here's another example of foreground blur, and you can see it kind of clipped the foot of this palm warbler. But even with doing so, again, just adds depth to your image. We have now 3 layers to this image: of foreground, where the subject is in focus, and then the background. Here we have, out of focus sticks, but they're really just cutting across the bird. There's not a large blurred area, and they are distractions, so that would be considered an obstruction. Now here we have an example of an obstruction and a non-obstruction. So this stick that's going from the left and cutting across to the right, that's an obstruction. The bird's not interacting with the stick. It's blurred, but not enough, and it's just cutting across the frame. However, the bird here, the pine siskin, is eating these little pine cones, and it technically is going in front of the body. That is not considered an obstruction because the bird is interacting with the object. And here we just cut out both variables. No obstructions, nothing. So now, again, when shooting, you need to consider your background. This was taken at Sheldon Marsh State Nature Preserve, and when I saw this veery on the ground, I immediately knew I needed to get my camera on the ground as well. And because I did this, I separated the background from the subject. Now, this background is about 30 or 40 feet behind the Veery. When before, it would have been, let's see, the Veery is about 3 or 4 inches tall, maybe a little bit tall. I'd say it's 6 inches. Hypotenuse of the triangle, quick mental math, would have been like 12 inches away from the bird, which would not be blurred. Also, large objects in your background are not good because even if they are far away and blurred, there'd still be a little corner, or like especially like if you have it with buildings cutting across your frame. Although buildings can be good if you're trying to make an urban environment photo. Here's another example of stuff in your background. Right here, these are leaves. These are very natural in the background, which is what makes it pleasing. But here we have a large object in our background. It's a stick, and that's why this background's a little bit more messed up. Messed up's not the right word. Busy. Here's another example. Again, the hypotenuse of the triangle going down to that background. It's just not blurred at all. This is the exact same Junko the next day. I got eye level, got that snow in my foreground, and I got that blurred out background. And again, just don't forget to reposition yourself to separate your subject from the background, and don't forget to get low when necessary. For this Black Phoebe image, I had this, all of these different leaves, and I figured out the best position to get enough leaves in the image to make it interesting, but also get that nice blurred out background. Okay, now let's talk about bird positioning and working with different light. So there's 3 different main types of light that you can work with when you have unidirectional light. That's front light, backlight, and side light. Obviously, this is backlight. So front light is good for a portrait. Front lighting is the most common in images, and it's never bad in a photo. It never can do you wrong. You never can go wrong with it. And here are some examples of front lighting. So front lighting can actually be on a cloudy day. Cloudy days really only give you front lighting. And then also here's a tricolored heron with some front lighting. Now, when your subject is front lit and your background is in a shadow, a black background can be created, and that's called a low key image. So we had high key, which is a white background, and low key, which is a black background. So here, this killdeer is all bright and lit up, and the background's completely in shadow, and I was able to mess around with it in post and be able to get that black background. That also can be created when your subject is completely white and your background's a little bit darker, so with the leaves here and these great egrets. And that's what I did here. This is front lighting as well, although it's a cloudy day front lighting. And then the other type of lighting, is backlighting, and that can be really cool in an image. Gets you those bokeh balls, which are just balls of blurred light. And there's again 2 types of backlighting. So you have rim light. This is this is a rim light image because you can still see some texture and details in the bird. And then you also have a silhouette. So silhouettes are better with a pleasing background. So we're talking clouds or sun. And I also said you need to know what the subject is by its silhouette. So even if you can't tell this is a blackbird, you can tell it's a bird and you can see the beak and the wings and the feet. And if you don't have this in your image, then it just looks like a big black blur. So here's another example of a silhouette. I was able to get some bokeh in my background to make it interesting. And then here's another example. I was able to get those clouds in the background, which makes it interesting. So rim light occurs when backlighting creates a highlight around the outline of the subject. So your entire image is going to be a lot brighter. And this is where you're going to get the majority of your bokeh balls like we have here in the background with this mallard. And here's just how positioning completely changes an image. These are the exact same birds. Here I was standing up shooting down on the bird, and now we have rim lighting. Here I got down to eye level, and now look, we have backlighting. And that's because the sun was reflecting off into my eyes on this image, and it was just reflecting off onto the bird in this image. Here's kind of the gray area of silhouette and rim lighting. So technically this is rim lighting because we can still see a lot of details within the subject and color detail that's kept. However, we have that bright light in the background, so that can be really cool to kind of change your images up, and it's really good for experimentation. And here's another example of just changing your exposure can kind of change if it's rim lighting or silhouetting. This is a completely silhouetted little blue heron, and here I pushed the exposure a little bit on this tricolored heron, and you can see I was able to keep some of the detail, and I would call this rim lighting and this silhouetting. Okay, so here's kind of what backlighting does to your images. And these are the exact same subject on the exact same perch. I just moved around. This is a hawk that I was shooting directly on in front lighting, and it's a nice portrait. And then I went to the other side, and all of a sudden it's a silhouette with some kind of cool, moody effects in it. So the last kind of lighting is side lighting, and it's not ideal, and for the most part it should be avoided. However, it can show texture in your subject. Like you can really see how round this mourning dove is. And also, always try something different. Not everything has to be a portrait like this image right here. You can try getting birds interacting with their environment. Like right here we have a mama wood duck with her baby, and then also a painted turtle with its little baby painted turtle, which I think is really cool in this image. Try some small in frame. You can go even smaller than this. And you can also try going some medium in frame or getting more than one bird in the frame. Here's one common redpoll, and then there's another. And then try some large in frame, even bigger than this, like that sandhill crane image I showed you, where it was just the face in the entire frame. And try shooting something other than just a face. Sometimes getting other parts of the bird. I know a lot of plumage shots are really cool too. So all of it's experimentation. Everything adds into each other, and the entire part of doing photography is to be fun and to show your own style. So although there's rules, and rules are there for a reason, for the most part they should be followed, rules are also made to be broken. So thank you guys. That was all 98 slides. My Instagram is Kid with a Sony if you guys want to see more of my work. And yeah, thanks for having me on. So any questions or anything?
Yeah. Do you ever use burst mode for some of your birds in flight, or are these all static, just single shot?
So by burst mode, do you mean when it takes a like you press the shutter once, takes like
Exactly.
5 or 6 photos? So I don't. I take a lot of images when I'm out in the field, because a lot of time, like when a bird's in flight, I do spray and pray. So I normally just turn my fire rate to high. It goes medium, high, high plus, and of course there's low. And I don't do even high plus. I just find it's just too much culling for me to do. So yeah.
And what size lens are you usually using?
So I have the Tamron 150 to 500. So let's see. I would say before I opened it, it's about this big. This would be about that. That big. It weighs with the camera like 5 pounds, 5.6 pounds. And then I've used my dad's lens. He has the 200 to 600 f 6.3, and that is a behemoth. And it's very big, and it can get hard to use after a while.
Are you always shooting on a tripod?
No, I never use tripods. I only use tripods for owls, really, yeah. It gets to be a lot to lug around. I have used monopods for some videography here and there, but even then, it's just too hard for me to carry around a tripod. And then also, I have shot with a 600 f4 on that A1 for like 10 minutes, and just doing that, like your wrists just hurts so much after holding it. It's just so heavy. So if you've ever considered shooting with a 600 f4, you probably need a tripod and a lot of money.
Do you go to school?
Yeah, I do. So I came here after school and track today. And then
When you're on the ground like that, do you have a little pod that's holding it off the ground, or is it weight?
so I have tried using I'm trying to remember what they call them. I think ground pods, or I used a thing that was kind of like a plastic plate, and I can see the appeal, and there are times where I do like them. Like for example, if I had one when I was shooting this lesser yellow legs, it was kind of high up. But what I realized is that from the difference of having the actual ground pod and then the gimbal head, no matter like how small they are, it's still higher than eye level, because a lot of these birds are so small. So I just like to shoot right above the ground. That's why I kind of hold the foot. I flip the foot upside down, and I hold it so I can just really hover it right above the ground.
Any other questions? Well, Alex, I really want to tell you, thank you very much. an excellent talk. I'm really very much impressed with the pictures. And again, he's Kid with a Sony on Instagram. Check it out. So
Thank you.
thank you very much, Alex. Really? Yeah. So this is